Human traffickers mock the wrong ex-FBI special agent at a Baltimore port. They rode in like kings of the desert leather cuts glinting under the scorching sun engines, roaring so loud the windows trembled. 3 swaggering bikers, blood on their fists and murder in their eyes, thought they'd found an easy mark when they cornered a lone woman at a dusty gas pump. What they didn't know was that she'd survived nightmares worse than their worst. Tonight, their intimidation turns to terror. Bones will break, empires will crumble, and a network half a world away will shudder under her wrath. Who is she, and why does she hold the power to pull the earth out from under them? Before we dive into this relentless battle, if you believe no one should ever be underestimated, smash that subscribe button, hit like, and ring the bell, so you don't miss a second of Justice Unleashed. Comment Justice below if you're ready to witness a former special ops warrior expose corruption, topple empires, and deliver the payback they never saw coming. The afternoon sun beat down on Highway 87, the asphalt rippling like molten metal under a blazing sky. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest town, the desert stretched in every direction. Red rock spires casting long, ominous shadows across a landscape that knew no mercy. Captain Rachel Morrison eased her Kawasaki Ninja to a stop at Johnson's gas station, the only sign of life for miles. She removed her helmet, letting the hot wind whip her dark hair against the back of her neck, and paused, every muscle alert. 15 years of special operations had trained her eyes to catalog even the smallest detail. 2 dusty pickups idling by a corroded pump, a security camera dangling uselessly from its mount cracks, spiderwebbing across the station's faded asphalt. She reached for the scar on her right hand, a souvenir from a firefight in Kandahar, and traced its jagged line with a fingertip. Memories washed over her, the stench of burning rubber, the shouts of teammates she couldn't save, the way the earth trembled when the compound finally exploded. She'd chosen this remote desert route, hoping for silence, but fate had other plans. Behind the counter, Joe Johnson watched her with a keen, knowing gaze. 20 years as an Air Force pararescue mon had taught him to recognize a soldier's stance, even when she carried no uniform. He offered a nod of respect instead of curiosity. "Long way from anywhere?" he asked, voice low. "Just clearing my head," Rachel replied, her tone clipped. She grabbed a steaming paper cup of coffee and cradled it in gloved hands, feeling its faint warmth seep through. Around them, the world was still save for the hum of the station's ancient neon sign overhead. She sipped, scanning the horizon-red dust, swirling in a distant dust devil, the promise of heat lightning flickering behind jagged mesas. This was a land of extremes beauty, carved in stone danger lurking in every canyon. And soon, danger would arrive on 3 roaring motorcycles. Rachel didn't flinch when the engines thundered into the lot, the vibration rattling the windows. She simply set her coffee down and shifted her weight, eyes narrowing behind dark lenses. The desert wolves had come. Marcus Blade Rodriguez at the lead, his scarred grin splitting a face hardened by violence. Snake, the tall shadow with fresh track marks still visible under his cut. And Tank, a hulking figure whose leather jacket could barely conceal the pistol at his hip. They swaggered into the store boots, clattering on the worn linoleum. Blade locked eyes with Rachel for a heartbeat too long, as if smelling weakness. "Sheriff Cooper says you missed the meeting," he taunted. "This little outpost doesn't rate your attention." Joe Johnson's hands trembled, but Rachel's voice was steel. "The sheriff should stick to law enforcement," she said softly, stepping between Blade and the counter. "And you boys should find a new gig." Blade laughed until Rachel's hand shot out, clamping down on his wrist with the precision of a master. His fingers spasmed open his face, blanching as her thumb pressed a nerve cluster. "You must be new," she whispered, voice cold. "I study amateurs for breakfast." Behind them, Snake and Tank froze, eyes darting for weapons, but Rachel's grip never wavered. She leaned in, breath barely stirring the dusty air. "Walk away? Or find out how many bones I can break before you hit the floor." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Blade's grin slipped, and he raised his free hand in surrender. He released a low, wounded laugh as they backed toward the door. Their motorcycles roared to life, and they peeled out onto the desert road, leaving Rachel with nothing but the echo of their engines and the taste of iron in her mouth. She picked up her coffee, now cold, and took a steady sip. The wound in her chest tightened not from rage, but from a familiar ache. Justice delayed is justice denied. She had painted a target on her back, but she'd never back down. Not here, not ever. As the sun dipped low, casting the gas station in an orange glow, Rachel closed her eyes. Somewhere beyond those red rocks lay corruption deeper than a biker gang's protection racket, something that ran straight through the heart of Shadow Creek. And she would find it. The sun had dipped below the mesas when Rachel settled into the cramped back office of Johnson Station. The desert night pressed against the single grimy window, and the hum of the neon pump lights felt almost conspiratorial. Deputy Sarah Martinez slipped inside, her face drawn and urgent. "Word travels fast in small towns," she whispered, pulling a thumb drive from her pocket. "I've been watching the mine. You need to see this." Rachel slid the drive into the ancient computer, the screen flickering to life. Satellite imagery bloomed across the monitor convoys of black SUVs, trailing shipping containers, guard rotations plotted like a military exercise. One container rotated on screen, its doors annotated, modified for human transport. A chill slithered down Rachel's spine. This was no simple protection racket. "They're moving people," she said, voice low enough that only Martinez could hear. Behind their tense exchange, Joe Johnson's radio crackled heavy engines on approach. Rachel rose, drawing her Glock with the ease of repetition. Through the window, 3 SUVs circled the station like wolves, sizing up their prey. Her pulse quickened professional surveillance, not biker muscle. "They're watching," she murmured. Martinez nodded once. Blade must have made the call. "The question is, are you staying or moving on?" Rachel's gaze drifted to the dusty horizon. She'd come seeking solitude, but now that she'd discovered this network, she couldn't walk away. "I'm staying," she said finally. "But we do this smart." By the time Rachel, Martinez, and Johnson reached Maria's diner, the neon sign buzzed like a warning. The parking lot held only 2 desert wolves, cutsmen in leather, feigning casual conversation. Inside, Maria Ramirez stood behind the counter, silver curls framing a weary smile. Her eyes, however, told a different story. She knew Rachel wasn't just passing through. "Coffee," Maria said, pouring a cup so dark it absorbed the low diner light. Rachel cradled it, the heat searing her palms through leather gloves. A slow bead of sweat traced her temple, anticipation, not fear. Maria led them to a back booth. 3 months ago, the mine was dead, she began, voice barely above a whisper. Then the wolves showed up calling themselves security for some new investment. Now there's trucks running all night, containers, SUVs, armed men. She paused, glancing at the biker cuts in the mirror behind Rachel. "My cousin's girl vanished. Police say runaway. I saw her get into one of those black vans." Rachel's jaw clenched. Her coffee went cold as she replayed the images from the thumb drive, shipping containers, modified tunnels, mapped names scrawled in Spanish and English. "They're using the old smuggling shafts," Martinez added, sliding a photo of a rusted hatch across the table. "These hills have a network of tunnels beneath them." A tension-filled silence followed. Then Rachel's phone buzzed. A secure number, Mike. "Major cartel activity near Shadow Creek. High-value targets. Ghost team on standby." She tucked the phone away. "They think the wolves handle the local muscle. They don't know I'm here." Maria set a slice of pie before Rachel, apple cinnamon gleaming under the fluorescent light. "Not much pie sold these days," Maria said, voice trembling. "Town's quieting down. Too many strangers." Rachel took a bite, letting sweetness anchor her nerves. Outside headlights swept past the windows. Within seconds, the diner's door chimed. 3 men in tactical gear, no biker cuts, stepped in their gait, fluid efficient. Private military contractors. The air shifted. One contractor loomed by the counter. His vest read Zero insignia, but his stance spoke volumes. Blade's voice followed, "Boss wants to talk." Rachel set down her fork. On the mirror behind her, she watched them split 2, moving toward the back exit, one flanking the door. Her breath slowed, heartbeat steady. This was her element to close quarters dim light, unexpected angles. The first man never drew his weapon. Rachel was already on him, sliding her coffee cup across the counter. Hot liquid and glass shattered in his face. He staggered as she vaulted the counter boots, landing with soft thuds on scuffed linoleum. Behind her, the second contractor reached for a pistol, but Rachel's arm locked around his elbow, twisting with a practiced click. He yelped as she dumped him onto a booth table, collapsing under his weight. The third lunged. She dropped into a low crouch, weaving between his punch and sweeping his legs out. He crashed into the door frame, head cracking the metal trim. Gunfire erupted from the entrance, two more contractors bearing rifles. Rachel dove behind a pie display, shards of ceramic rattling at her back. Splintered pastry floated in the air. She felt the vibration of bullets piercing the counter's edge. Blade's voice cut through the chaos. "You can't hide forever." Rachel clicked a small device on her belt, EMP. Lights winked out in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed the diner. Her other senses flared. She moved like a ghost between booths, her fingers grazing improvised charges she'd set earlier. Two men fell to silent, precise blows. The third screamed when she snapped his trigger finger backward. When the lights buzzed back on, the contractors lay crumpled on the floor, moaning. Blade stood in the doorway, leather cut stained with blood and dignity. He raised a pistol too slow. Rachel appeared behind him, long shadow cast by broken neon. She pressed her gun against his temple. "This is your one shot," she whispered, voice as cold as the pie display's shattered glass. "Leave now and you live. Stay, and I'll bury you in these ruins." Blade stared into her eyes, saw something he'd never expected, and lowered his gun. He nodded once, agonized, and backed out into the night. Rachel exhaled, voice rough. "They're not just wolves," she said, glancing at the bodies and blood on the floor. "They're the tip of something bigger." Martinez moved to secure the fallen, her own face pale but resolute. "I've got deputies I can trust," she offered. "We'll lock down the exits." Rachel nodded, holstering her pistol. "Then let's head underground." She led them to a hidden door behind the storage shelves. The corridor beyond was narrow, the air musty with decades of disuse. Graffiti from bootleggers' past traced the walls. Ahead, darkness yawned, a network of arteries beneath the town. As they descended, Rachel's phone buzzed again. Mike. Surgeon arriving in 48 hours? Cartel? Accelerating ops. She paused on the threshold, fingertips grazing the worn steel door. A final hook. They've brought the surgeon, the man who ghosts nightmares worse than death. In the tunnel's hush, she planted a fierce smile. "Let them come," she said. "They've no idea what waits for them down here." And with that, the desert's silent hunter slipped into the shadows, ready to turn the hunter into prey. They spilled into the church basement like ghosts emerging from the earth, flickering headlamps carving pale arcs across ancient stone walls. Rachel laid out the faded mining surveys on a makeshift table, each crease, each tunnel marked in spidery ink. Her fingers hovered over the lines as if tracing a pulse. "This network runs beneath half the town," she said, voice low enough to crack stone. "If we control these arteries, we control the fight." Martinez crouched beside her, tapping at a tablet that mapped guard rotations and sensor locations. "They've planted cameras at junctions 3 and 7, she whispered. "Thermal sensors on the main corridor. You'll need to avoid those." Her finger landed on a narrow service shaft sketched in the margin. "This route isn't covered too tight for their gear, but you can slip through." Behind them, Maria Ramirez advanced with Carlos at her side. He unrolled laminated prints of the church floor plan, pointing out the panel under the confessional that led down here. "We've got 3 entry points," Maria said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The front door, the storage closet, and Father O'Leary's confessional. Use whichever is safest. Only one goes live at a time." Rachel stood, shoulders uncoiling. The stale air clung to her skin, but her mind raced hotter than any desert sun. Phase 1. Intel gathering. Martinez, you, and Jenny will feed live data from the cameras back to Carlos at the mine. He'll confirm patrol patterns. We'll map every step before we move. She paused, letting the weight sink in. Phase 2. Isolation. At 0200 hours, we trigger the EMP I stashed in the transformer box behind the station. Lights go out across the town, no street lamps, no cameras above ground. Their focus will be on restoring power. Maria's jaw tightened. Then what Rachel exhaled, eyes glinting. Then we become shadows. She tapped the tunnel map. We'll insert two-man teams at 4 key junctions, J2, J4, J6, J8. Each team will cut the tunnel network in half, seal their sections with improvised bulkheads. That traps their forces in isolated pockets. Her tone sharpened. They'll run into kill zones we preset tripwire charges, corrosive gas canisters, stolen from the mine's old chemical lab. Martinez blinked and then nodded. They won't know what hit them. Phase 3. Surgeon's arrival. Rachel traced a route from the private airstrip into the western tunnel mouth where Victor the Architect Silva will inspect the operation. He's meticulous. He'll walk those corridors expecting a clean handoff, not a maze of death traps. She tapped the spot beneath the cathedral chamber. That's our pièce de résistance. We collapse the supports, ignite the charges, and watch his empire crumble around him. Silence fell. The only sound was the faint drip of water echoing in the chamber. Joe Johnson swallowed, voice husky. You're talking structural collapse. People could die. Rachel turned to him, face softening. They planned to bury dozens alive, women, children, innocent people, if anyone got curious. We're redirecting that violence back onto the perpetrators. Her gaze swept the group. We're not monsters. We're justice. Maria nodded, tears glinting. Make them feel what their victims felt. Carlos clicked his comm. Mine intel confirms increased activity at 0400 hours. They expect a raid on the warehouse, not a subterranean ambush. Rachel allowed herself a thin smile. Perfect. They'll be lured to the warehouse, our decoy site, while we move into position below. She laid a hand on the table, indexing every point. Jenny, you'll detonate flash charges at the warehouse entrance to draw the trucks away. When they roll out the power cuts. Martinez, you'll coordinate local deputies to cordon off exit roads. Roadblocks at the bridges. Spike strips on the service lanes. Martinez's eyes narrowed. We'll need diversions above ground. Exactly. Rachel reached under her jacket and pulled a small remote. These smoke canisters. We'll deploy them along Main Street, make it look like a riot. Their forces will rush there, leaving the tunnels underdefended. She paused, letting each plan lock into place in their minds. We have 36 hours until we make our move, she said. Tomorrow, the council meeting at the community center will draw half their manpower above ground. That's the moment we strike from below. Carlos whispered. The surgeon arrives in 24. Rachel's jaw tightened. Then we speed it up by 12. The faster we go, the less time they have to adapt. Joe Johnson exhaled, voice thick with resolve. I'll prepare the explosives. Maria stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Rachel's shoulder. Be safe down there. Rachel nodded, scanning the faces around her, each one voicing fear, determination, hope. Their fragile alliance, forged in desperation, now held the fate of Shadow Creek in its hands. She flicked off her headlamp, plunging them into darkness. Only her voice cut through the black rest, if you can. Review your assignments. Tomorrow night we bring the real quake. Get ready to bury the surgeon in his own labyrinth. A heartbeat passed, then another. Their breaths echoed in the tunnels as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the red rocks. Inside the plan of vengeance and justice was set each line drawn in blood, each trap laid with cold precision. Rachel Morrison slipped her gloved hand into her jacket pocket, feeling the familiar weight of her trident patch against her chest. Let them come, she breathed. Let them come. Phase 1 began at midnight. Outside, a low hum ran through the desert as the transformer behind Johnson Station coughed its last sparks, then went silent. Streetlights winked out along Highway 87, plunging Shadow Creek into a blackout so complete it felt like the world itself had been erased. In the darkness, Rachel Morrison and her 4-man advance team slipped into the mine's entrance small tactical lights, dancing across damp stone walls. They moved in near-perfect synchronicity, breaths measured footsteps muffled by decades of mineral dust. At Junction 2, Corporal Diaz paused beneath a rusted beam and tapped twice on his flashlight, the prearranged signal. Seconds later, Ghost Team Bravo detonated a series of nail charges at the warehouse south of Main Street. A thunderclap of sound and a cascade of sparks echoed through the tunnel network. Above ground, the decoy raid drew the Wolves' armored trucks and private contractors like moths to a flame. Rachel pressed her back to the cool rock, feeling her heart settle into a steady rhythm. She keyed her comms. Phase 1, secure. Moving to Junction 4. Her voice was calm even in the chaos. She knew that once the Wolves and their contractors flooded toward the warehouse, the mines and tunnels would be theirs. At Junction 4, Martinez's squad crouched behind a collapsed wooden support. The tunnels here curved upward, leading directly beneath the old community center. They set portable bulkheads in place, makeshift steel walls rigged with gas canisters stolen from the mine's long-abandoned chemical lab. One by one, they welded quick-release latches. Rachel hovered over the blueprints flickering on Martinez's tablet. Bulkhead seals set. Martinez nodded. Ready. Gassed payloads armed, she asked CPL Jenkins. A dark silhouette against the monitor, Jenkins gave a thumbs up. Set timers. Rachel turned to her team. This is where we trap them. She pulled a small mirror from her vest and angled it down the corridor. Through the lens, she caught the glowing red reticle of a thermal sensor, the very junction they'd identified as blind spot. With a soft click, she disabled it using an improvised EMP nub plugged into the sensor's junction box. The light on the device flickered once and died. The tunnel was theirs. A heartbeat later through her headset warehouse decoy, drawing heavy fire. Bullet tracers arced across metal shelving as Martinez's diversion team engaged the Wolves' mercenaries above. Engines roared, gunfire rattled, sirens wailed in the distance. Yet, beneath their feet, the only sound was the hiss of evac gas vents opening inside the sealed bulkheads. The first squad moved forward to Junction 6, where the main artery met the old cooling shaft. Rachel stalked ahead, Glock-drawn eyes, scanning every bolt and joint. She tapped the wall 3 times. The final signal. Without hesitation, 2 blast charges undercut the shaft's support beams. A muffled explosion shook the earth. Plumes of concrete dust drifted into the beam of her light. The corridor tilted off-kilter, trapping any pursuers in a narrow kill zone. Minutes stretched. Then she heard muted screams as contractors above tried and failed to navigate the collapsing passage. She pictured their fear, hot panic in cold steel boots. Phase 1 complete, Rachel murmured. Good work. Phase 2 unleashed its carnage at 01:15. In the belly of Shadow Creek, Rachel led 2-man strike teams into the sealed sections. Each operator carried a red phosphor flare, silent markers to identify friendly forces in the choking gloom. They moved like phantoms, clearing one chamber after another. Each time a charge detonated, it brought a section of tunnel down, severing the cartel's control lines. At Junction 8, Rachel encountered her first direct enemy contact. A lone guard left behind to monitor the main corridor swung a flashlight and shouted into his radio. She froze firelight illuminating the barrel of his rifle for an instant before she closed the distance. Her boot struck the back of his knee. He staggered forward into her outstretched arm. A swift wrist lock snapped his grip. His gun clattered to the floor. She bent him to one knee, silencing him with a cloth gag and binding his hands. His eyes, wide with terror, met hers. In that moment, Rachel's voice was low but resolute. This ends tonight. She left him breathing and moved on. No mercy, no hesitation. Each man she captured added to the growing tide of fear above ground, echoed in police radios confused by patchy coverage. Phase 3 was the pièce de résistance. At 01:45, with half the cartel's forces isolated underground and their above-ground reinforcements lured to the decoy, Rachel triggered the final sequence. Beneath the old cathedral chamber, she stood at the apex of the tunnel network. 4 remote detonators dangled from her vest, each wired to key structural supports overhead. She keyed her comms, all units hold position. On my mark, a beat, mark. One by one, the detonators ignited. The earth trembled as ceiling supports groaned and gave way. Plumes of concrete dust roiled around Rachel, illuminated by red phosphor flares in the distance. The cathedral's vaulted roof punched downward in a rumble like rolling thunder, sealing the corridors, trapping any remaining contractors or wolves inside. Above ground, the community center's metal detectors blared alarms as swarm lights diplit the building's entrance. Dozens of cartel enforcers, drawn by the meeting of business owners, ran toward the chaos at the warehouse. Police vehicles screeched to intercept, only to find empty racks and live-streamed evidence of terror. Back below, Rachel ascended the shaft of debris into the catacomb beneath the cathedral floor. The smell of earth and concrete dust clung to her lungs. She wiped a line of sweat from her brow and pressed on until she found him, Victor the architect, kneeling before a makeshift altar of ledger books, passports, and a laptop glowing with encrypted data. He looked up, eyes narrowing as the rubble settled. "Captain Morrison," he intoned, voice eerily calm amidst the collapse. "So you led me into my own tomb." She holstered her gun boots, crunching on fallen concrete. "Your tomb's been under construction for months," she replied, voice as cold as the stone walls. "Now it's time to close the lid." He reached for a hidden blade, ceramic no metal detectors, but Rachel was faster. She kicked the pile of papers into his face, drawing his arms wide. Then she struck a palm strike to the chin that snapped his head back, followed by a precise elbow to the solar plexus. He coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. Above, the tunnel supports gave one final groan and collapsed, completely cutting off any hope of escape. Dust settled. An oppressive silence fell, broken only by Victor's ragged breaths. Rachel knelt beside him, snapping handcuffs into place. "No more running," she said, voice low. "Not tonight. Not ever." Minutes later, the first sheriff's units carved through the debris. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies in the new moon darkness. Martinez led them through the front door of the church, guiding surprised deputies past the sealed entrance. Joe Johnson directed them to the warehouse perimeter, where wrecked SUVs lay smoldering. Above ground, survivors emerged, terrified business owners, disoriented cartel foot soldiers, and a handful of local deputies unaware of the scale of Rachel's operation. They witnessed Victor led out in cuffs, Rachel standing over him like a wraith in fatigues, pistol slung but gleaming under strobe lights. She allowed herself a single nod, less of victory, more of acknowledgement to those who'd helped. Martinez exhaled smile, breaking through the grime. "We did it." Rachel's gaze swept the horizon, the mining hills, the silent tunnels, the battered station now bathed in emergency lights. Her throat tightened with the weight of all they'd accomplished and all they still had to fight. She turned to the deputies. "Collect every piece of evidence, every ledger, every computer drive. This operation ends now." Then, without looking back, she disappeared into the night, leaving justice in her wake, and a town forever changed by a phantom warrior who struck from the shadows. The first light of dawn crept across Shadow Creek's shattered streets as law enforcement poured through every corner of the operation site. Governor's choppers hovered above the mine, their rotors whipping red dust into swirling vortices. Down below, federal agents in black tactical gear hauled out battered shipping containers, their walls pried open to reveal rows of haggard survivors. Men, women, even children, faces etched by fear, relief, and disbelief. Family members, alerted by Jenny Chen's anonymous tip line, flooded the perimeter in a wave of raw emotion. Mothers knelt beside daughters, clutching their torn clothes. Fathers collapsed to their knees, heads resting against the shoulders of deputies who had once turned a blind eye. A teenage girl pressed her palm to Rachel's boot, tears sliding down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Rachel watched from the shadows, her silhouette framed by flashing police lights. Her chest tightened, not from fatigue, but from something far deeper, the knowledge that her vengeance had translated into salvation. She recalled the shipping manifests that had scrawled their destinies in ink, now shredded in rippling puddles of hydraulic fluid. At the community center, business owners, once complicit in silence, stepped forward to testify under federal immunity. Their voices trembled as they recounted bribes, threats, and the nameless clients they'd never dared to question. Deputy Delgado stood at a lectern, his badge gleaming, as he swore them in. Each confession rattled the room like a judge's gavel, a moratorium on corruption that would echo for years. In a makeshift command post beneath the church, Carlos and Maria Ramirez sifted through hard drives of encrypted data. Their hands shook as they discovered bank transfers, offshore accounts, and photographs of officials rubbing shoulders with cartel lieutenants. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, tears of vindication for the daughter she'd lost, and an entire town betrayed. Above ground, Victor the Architect Silva emerged in leg irons flanked by agents. His posture was defiant chin, lifted even as cameras clicked. He surveyed the carnage, the collapsed tunnels, the burned-out SUVs, and, for the first time, his expression cracked. A bead of sweat traced a clean line down his temple. The empire he had built lay in ruins, ground to dust by a single operative. Sheriff Cooper approached Rachel uniform stained with dust. His eyes darted between her and the wreckage. He offered a stiff nod, an unspoken apology for his own sins. Rachel met his gaze, voice low yet unyielding in the hushed desert air. No more secrets. No more deals in the dark. Across town, news crews broadcast live footage of survivors embracing loved ones. Viewers nationwide watched tears, laughter-stunned silence, and every man's reckoning with justice served. Social media erupted with one unifying hashtag: Judge Shadow Creek stands. Back at Johnson's gas station, Joe Johnson poured cups of coffee for deputies pouring in evidence. The ancient neon sign flickered, once then glowed steady, as though resurrected by the town's new resolve. He pressed a steaming mug into Rachel's hand. She lifted it in a brief salute, feeling its warmth seep through her gloves. As the sun climbed higher, Rachel slipped away from the crowd, helmet in hand. She paused on the cracked pavement, staring at 3 empty parking spaces where motorcycles and SUVs once roared. The desert wind whispered through the gas station awning, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and hope. She placed a single fingertip at the scar on her hand, tracing the jagged line, the souvenir of a brother in arms lost to cartel cruelty. Today, that scar felt less like a burden and more like a vow fulfilled. Rachel mounted her bike. The engine's rasp broke the morning stillness. As she roared eastward toward the rising sun, Shadow Creek stood reborn, a testament to one woman's fury, one town's redemption and justice delivered in the heart of the desert. Thank you for witnessing the storm that swept through Shadow Creek. Today, ordinary streets are safer because one woman refused to stand down. But this fight isn't over. Cartels adapt, corruption creeps back, and injustice never sleeps. If you believe in the power of courage over cruelty, hit subscribe and ring the bell now. Share this video with someone who needs to know that no tyrant, no empire built on fear can withstand relentless justice. Drop a comment below with your own story of standing up to bullies or corruption. Let's build a community that refuses to look the other way. Don't miss our next true tale of defiance and redemption. Click the link on your screen for another journey into the heart of darkness and the light that conquers it. Remember, when justice calls, heroes answer. We'll see you there.